you can have a huge impact in every sense. You know, you can. There's something called the FIFA Pro License course for football, which managers have to take, and it's done. And there's one of them done here in Cardiff. And one of the things on the course is how you must stay in with your local newspaper. Now, by your local newspaper, that can mean your national local newspaper if you're obviously in charge of Wales. If you're in charge of Cardiff City, it means staying in with the Echo. If you're in charge of Swansea City, it means staying in with the Evening Post. Because these individuals, and these are the words on the course, these individuals are actually, your local journalist is actually as influential as your own chairman, because he can actually influence the fans, if you like, or he can represent the voice of the fans. So there is an awful lot of responsibility that goes there, but there's an awful lot of reward as well. I mean, I personally, as well as, you know, going to the Six Nations games and reporting on them, going to the Rugby World Cup final, going to Wales-England internationals of football, I've covered the Ashes, I've personally covered the World Cup in America in 1994, I've covered Euro 96, I've covered world heavyweight title fights, so I've got a vast amount of experience of all these things, and it's incredibly rewarding. And you know, now I take a little bit of a back seat from a lot of it, although I do my share of writing. I tend to have the overview in the office now and manage the desk more than actually day-to-day writing. But as I say, with that comes that responsibility. Now, my own personal experience, I got into the profession, I did my traineeship in Newport on the South Wales Argus, and that was as a news reporter. I did everything that all news reporters do. I did my courts, I did my councils, I did the inquests. I had the unenviable task of knocking on people's doors when their son or daughter had been killed and getting obituary pieces from them. You know, grinding held me in terrific stead. Really did, because in those days you would actually, the evening papers were evening papers. These days most evening papers are now printed overnight, but in those days there was something like a 10 or 11 o'clock deadline. So you would regularly, the first thing you would do would go to the local police station and do what you call your police calls, and they would give you details of anything that had happened overnight, and you would then have to dash out, grab the nearest telephone, because mobile phones haven't been in existence that long actually. You have to grab the nearest telephone and ring over your story direct to copy takers, who would put it in the paper then, and you know, it would then be printed immediately. Those days have changed a little bit, obviously, because obviously, you know, you're not so pressurised trying to find a public phone box. You've got laptops to work from now, and obviously you've got mobiles, but also, as I say, evening paper deadlines have changed, and a lot of them, including the Echo, are now printing overnight anyway, so you're not working such time constraints. But everything I learned in those days, everything holds me in good stead now. I recall an incident when I was out in Italy a few years ago, when Bobby Gould was dismissed as Wales manager, and this happened after our deadline. But obviously we just had to hold the presses and get this in as a back page lead and also a front page lead. And it just happened like that with me. And I remember getting on the bus then back. There's a media, when you go away with Wales, there's a media bus and there's a team bus, and you sit on a media bus. When we were going back to our hotel, I remember just thinking, everything that I learned in those days as a news journalist came to fruition here. It was all that natural training. It just happened naturally for me because of that direct training, because of that immediacy that I learned when I did my police calls, my fire calls, my ambulance calls. I rushed over court copy or whatever. So I'm going to come on to this in a minute. My advice would be very strongly that anybody who wants to get into any specialist area of journalism, including sport, I really do think you should do your news training for a couple of years first. But I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Personally, I then moved on to the Western Daily Press in Bristol. I had a brief spell as chief reporter at the Evening Advertiser in Swindon when the infamous Michael Ryan went on the rampage. And then I was offered a job in London, but I chose instead to come to Wales on Sunday. I was offered a job in one of the national papers, but I chose instead to come to Wales on Sunday to help pilot this new very much sports-driven newspaper. And from there, I personally have gone on. I was a general writer on Wales on Sunday. I specialised a little bit as a general sports writer on Wales on Sunday. I specialised a little bit in football, but I covered all sports. I became deputy editor, I became sports editor, I moved on to become sports editor of the Western Mail. And now, as I say, I'm head of sports on Media Wales, which covers all the titles, including the online product as well. And in our building, make no mistake, sport is the #1 driver for sales and for traffic online. We recently did a survey for the Western Mail of 4-figure sum of individuals who were asked across the country about reasons for buying the Western Mail. The first reason was Welsh sport. The second reason was national sport. The latter one shocked me a little bit because it was ahead of Welsh news. But it just shows the thirst there is to buy the paper for sport. Regularly, the Echo, Cardiff City is a big driver of the South Wales Echo. Wales and Sunday has historically sold 90 to 95% on its sports content. And we have daily traffic figures for our online content where we have the top 11 hits for each story on any given on every particular day of the week. And of those, there's a minimum of 7 sports stories on those in that top 11, and very often we'll have all 11. So it's a huge driver in Wales. People do love their sport in Wales, as they would in other cities, obviously. But you know, there seems to be this remarkable feel for their football and their rugby teams here in particular. And as I say, that comes back, I repeat again, to the responsibility thing that I mentioned earlier. In terms of getting into the specialist area, there's a little bit doubling up here because Niamh has asked me to offer my advice on how to get a job at the end of this degree. So, you know, the two sort of dovetailing together, if you like. There are a number of fundamentals. One is get some work experience behind you if you can. I can't emphasise enough how that impresses an employer if you show the wherewithal to actually go out, have a go in a newsroom. We are inundated with people requesting work experience, but we do endeavour to help as best we can. And we have a lot of people who obviously want to work in sport as well. So we do try to help. We're extremely busy in there on a daily basis. And sometimes I feel we're being a little bit rude to the individuals. But I was saying to Niamh, my own eldest son is now 15, and he, you know, I would hate to him to be treated in a disrespectful way, whether he goes to work in a newspaper office, in a bank, wherever, in a classroom or whatever. So, you know, we will try to be courteous in that respect, but I would advise very strongly to try and get something behind you. In newspaper terms, it'd be great to get some cuttings behind you if you can. And again, we always endeavour to give somebody a byline, something that they do while they're with us. Certainly for a place like ours, and you know, it's slightly different in broadcast to be fair, certainly a place like ours, you do have to have your NCTJ qualification, which obviously means the postgrad after this particular course, which obviously means your 100-word minute shorthand, it means your public affairs, and it means your law, obviously. So that's an absolute prerequisite as far as we are concerned, but that's not necessarily the case in other media outlets across Britain. But obviously there's the Cardiff postgrad course for that. There's also, we used to actually take on trainees and send them up to Newcastle for what amounts to a 17-week course, at the end of which they get their proficiency test, which is an exam that you sit at the end of your traineeship, if you like. And, you know, you've got to be pretty poor to fail that exam. Everybody just sails through it, to be honest with you, particularly if you've had 18 months of hands-on experience working on a particular title. But the recession has actually stopped that taking place at the moment. But I think we're looking to do that again. But there is something called the Press Association course, which is a similar thing, which is held in both London and Newcastle, I think I'm right in saying, where you can get that qualification anyway. But I